Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April edition of the Hyber Insight series. We want to really welcome everyone. Folks will be joining as we progress in the call. This month, we are really talking about a very exciting topic that applies to us all, especially in these times of challenges and uncertainties and navigating the space today in the marketplace or whatever organization geography you may find yourself. We see that things are full of complexities and uncertainties. So this month we're talking about the systems mindset, and we're looking at a smarter way to solve complex problems. And my name is Charles OJ. I am the CEO of Hyber Group. At Hyber Group, we help transform products, ideas, services, teams, and organizations into innovation leaders. And today I have two wonderful gentlemen joining me in this wonderful session. I would like to introduce Mr. Adeyinka Aderumbi, who is the Chief Information Officer at Rex Insurance. Adeyinka, do you want to say hi to the audience?
Thank you, Charles, for having me. Hi, audience.
Good. Secondly, I have a very, very wonderful friend of mine, Mr. Sorunfe Uzoma, who is the Principal Program Manager at Microsoft. Sorunfe, how are you? Do you want to say hi?
Very well, thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Good, good, good. I mean, while we're waiting for our audience to trickle into the room, it will be interesting to just understand. I mean, how are things going on the business side? I trust that 2025 is we're winning, and irrespective of all the dynamics, it's going well. How is it looking, Adenka?
So, Charles, uncertainty has become the name of the game. I think we are all now getting used to a very uncertain world. But that also gives a lot of advantages. There are some new dimension in terms of the use of AI, the push on digital transformation, especially with the increased uncertainty. Businesses don't want to make long-term investment; they want short-term value. So it's become a very, how will I say, boiling soup of choices between technology, solution, environment, and business. But I think it's more fun.
Awesome, awesome. So, what about you?
I think it's been a very interesting period. I think for most people who may not have been aware of how closely coupled business is to geopolitics and sort of events in different parts of the world. I think it's becoming more obvious that there is a limit to which your own individual or business strategy can survive or succeed outside of the context of much larger shifts that are going on. And I think that people are now beginning to consider, learn, and apply themselves to understanding what those shifts are, what that global order looks like, potentially how best to position themselves in an uncertain system, because there are ways to do it, right? So understanding and not just throwing darts at the wall, but understanding how best to approach an uncertain system that you do not control, right? So it's been a very interesting period.
Wow, I really like how you, in a way, just summarize the pulse of the time. And I like your concluding statement there, talking about approach, which is really the ethos of what we're trying to do today. How do we approach the world with a mindset and with a set of tools and resources that allow us to navigate the scheme of things? Resilience today is the name of the game, and I think systems thinking can play a role. And today it's really a conversation that we're trying to have here. And we want to encourage the audience, if they have any questions, they can post it in the chat room, which I will be checking from time to time. And I will be bringing these questions to us as we go through the conversation for today, which will include, we're going to talk about, why systems matter, what really makes a system, the characteristics of a system. And the main and core area of our conversation today is the seven steps for applying systems thinking to any project, whether inside of the business, whether in the marketplace, or in the geographies that we may be positioned in. And then we'll have a set of key takeaways that we can apply to our businesses, organizations come Monday morning. So I'm really, really excited to have us, and let's dive into this. And I want to kick off with a question to Adeyinka. We're talking about systems thinking, and I want to ask, systems thinking. Adeyinka, systems thinking sounds very scientific, very intellectual, very academic, but systems are all around us. Why is having a systems mindset important to you as an innovator and leader? Adeyinka?
Thank you, Charles. Having been in innovation for some time, I'm sure you've met a lot of businesses that are looking for problems. They are solving the problem that they are not sure whether it's a problem. They just create an app, create a business, and they start running. And oftentimes when we do the postmortem of these businesses, they die before their time, because really, that's why you need a framework like system thinking. Because before you jump into that pool and start innovating and start solving, you need to be sure of the problem you are looking at. So when you look at system thinking, it allows you to look at the problem from a big picture, not just sit on your silo, your shielded angle. Look at that problem from the holistic standpoint. How does this problem affect everybody? What are the ecosystems supporting or magnifying, reducing this problem? What is the root cause of this problem? One of the tools we use is things like 5 whys. You start trying to get to the root cause of a problem that you are trying to solve, because it is very easy for people to just jump into a problem and run at it. At the same time, it gives you a very strategic foresight. You are looking at problems from a strategic dimension. You are looking at the impact of this. And because you are looking at a whole problem, your innovations becomes really good. You are not innovating in space. You are not innovating in your head. You are innovating to fit a system. It's possible to do a good application, but it doesn't meet a system. You can out-innovate a system. You can under-innovate. You might even ignore the relationship that power the system. And so you are doing things that will not really work. At the same time, it positions you for better success, because now you have a deep understanding of the whole system. You understand the levers that move the system. So it's easier for you to create something that can impact that system.
Interesting. As you're talking, I was thinking about, I was talking to a client. They were having a summit, and I was speaking with them. And the challenge they are trying to solve is so big, it's actually systemic. And I dropped the word, and I said, I dropped the word that our problems are systems as well. And I phrased it, our problems are disorganized organizations. Like disorganized organization. Like the problem itself is a system, and you cannot address a systemic problem without thinking from a systems standpoint. And I want to lay a foundation here for our webinar and this very important subject with a case study, something we did and we experienced a couple of years ago as we were trying to improve education for 27 million children in Nigeria. And like you properly pointed out, Can we have
Both
can
of
we
you
Jed,
remove yourself. I'm
can
gonna
we
mute
mute
something. Bye-bye. I'll see you later.
can we mute good. So very interestingly, just like you've said, Adinka, um, it's a whole system, and this problem had to do with education. There were a bunch of pain points that we were trying to address. We put a solution together to touch those pain points. We piloted the solution with about 200,000, feeding about 200,000 children per day, and then we started looking at how to scale the solution, and we put together a greenfield project where we backward integrated into agriculture. And as we were trying to position and get things in place to scale the model, some elements of the system basically broke down. So one element was the primary customer and the primary financier being government for the project changed administration. All right. And we didn't really figure out properly our business model, which is part of the system. And a project that took us 3 years to build, because we ran the pilot for about 3 years. It took us 3 years to build it. It died in 3 months. So once an element or a part of the system breaks down, things begin to really fall apart. And that's why I would say that, and to your point, systems are very, very very systems thinking is very, very important in a couple of ways. We it helps us to solve overwhelming problems. Like you said, Adeka, we can see the big picture. We can clarify on how these small units interact. We can identify risk. We can look at every member's role and how it is critical for the whole part and keep everything together so that the results and impact that we're trying to deliver is sustainable. And I think sustainability is really a very key component of what we are trying to achieve here. And I would like to define what a system is. And according to the definition we lifted from the Oxford Dictionary, a system can be understood as a collection of interconnected parts that work together to achieve a common goal. And let me turn to Fair and ask, from your experience and perspective, does this definition does it make sense, and can you expand on it a little?
So my I have an interesting thought around this definition. So yes, the definition is it's a good definition, but sometimes one of the things that I do, whether it is in my work or my personal life or engaging with people in conversation, is I try to make sure that the words that are communicated paint the precise picture that I'm trying to paint via those words, right? So sometimes when you look at this definition and you look at the phrase "a common goal," people assume that a common goal is the same thing as an agreed goal, and it's not. They're not the same thing, right? And I'll explain what I mean by the difference. So and I'll just use a very simple system. If I put 2 into a system and it produces 4 at the end as the output of that system, if the common goal or the agreed goal was that it should produce 1,000, that agreed goal has no influence or no impact on the outcome that we're seeing. So we must accept that that system is a multiplying system. It's not a system that gives you 100, 1,000 or 100. It gives you 4. It just doubles the number you put in. Now let me put this in, real world in a real world scenario. And I think it's a bit of a funny example, but I like to use it. So if you go into an airport, I won't mention any country's name, but if you go into an airport in a developing country or maybe in Africa, and the system of going through that airport has so many encumbrances that you think that the system fails at getting you to your airplane as fast as you want to, it is possible that that's not what the system was designed for, even if that's what the agreed goal was. So that distinction between what we think a system should do and what the system does is a distinction that I think people often miss out when they're dealing with systems.
Interesting. I really like the way you framed it. Short. One of our someone from the audience, was asking what this definition actually is and where is it applied? Where is it applied to? And like you've mentioned, I think a system really it can be applied to almost everything in life. If we look around us, it's made up of different parts that are all coming, to work together towards either a common or aligned goal. But at the end of the day, an outcome that needs to be done, a result that entire body or combination of parts is working towards in a cohesive way. So there are systems around us. Even us as human beings, we are a system, and we are even a system of systems. All right, whether it's the skeletal system, whether it's the muscular system, whether it's the digestive system, just our own biological configuration in itself is a complex system. And as we look around us with different things, I think the beginning of systems thinking is the recognition of the systems that are in operation around us. That can be a value chain, that can be a team, that can be a company, that can be an event, a situation. It's just things coming together and understanding exactly how they work. But our message here is that we as humans, we're a living system. We are designed with a systems mindset naturally because of how our biological configuration is set up. And many things around us are systems. Like this is an opera I attended in Lagos at the Museum Center. And when I looked at how all the different players in the orchestra, how they just combine, their own individual output in a very harmonious way to deliver a sound that is so cohesive. This is a system. Or whether it's football as a game, the teams are systems. The overall game is a system. So this is really the starting point of systems thinking, where we are able to recognize systems around us. And normally these systems will have certain characteristics. So like Francis is asking from the audience, what's the difference between a system and a value chain? It's not about whether they are different. A value chain is a system. Anything that you can see, there are four key areas, right? There is input, there is some form of output, there are different parts, and these parts can be independent and yet interconnected. There's some kind of organization around how these parts are working together, and they are working towards a particular purpose. All right. So a value chain, like you're saying, Francis, is also a system. All right. And these are the characteristics of a system. All right. And so back to you again. What do you think about these these characteristics, even as you defined systems thinking earlier from your own experience and what you do day to day?
I think, from my own perspective, I've had the opportunity to work on different projects, I would say, with the objective being to intervene in a system and move it from an agreed goal to a common goal, in a sense, right? Move it from what people wanted it to do that it is not doing to what people actually wanted to do, right? And I remember one experience where I was working within a company that was looking to, they had a challenge. They were looking to break into the market. They were very successful in the upper end, like with the enterprise organizations. But the further down you go, they didn't have as much success. And they were doing their best. They were trying to. Their partner ecosystem, didn't seem to be playing ball. But when I sat down and I did the analysis, the partners were fine. You do 1 or 2 or 3 deals a year, you do 40%, 50% margin on those deals, and you're fine. To go further down, that's to the mid-tier or the lower tier organizations will require more work, more employees, and they just didn't see, even though it would increase their revenue and maybe even increase their profitability, the amount of effort it would require was a bit too much for them. And so the way the system worked was that this central enterprise that I was engaged with was only taking a sliver of the market, which was the upper end of the market, large enterprises, and they really wanted to push down into the other enterprises and provide their services to them. Without that understanding, you would keep throwing money at it. So you would set up programs for the partners to go work with the large enterprises. You would have big events and things like that, and they will attend and they would speak and they would smile. They would invite in the smaller companies as customers, but when it came to execution, the burden of execution was just too much, and they were already profitable. So that insight, the understanding that those large entities are not incentivized to go after mid-market and small businesses was the insight that allowed me to redesign the system, right? One of the things that happened in there was, even though these large partners had this, were this profitable, there were much smaller partners who don't have the strength or the girth or the financial wherewithal to be able to access or go to market on their own. So by building a system that connected smaller partners to larger partners, where the small partners were willing to engage with small businesses and mid-market businesses, just leveraging the central skill of the larger partner. So building a system in which two of them could come together and go to market allowed for the large partner to get the upside without making investments in personnel, and allowed for the small partner to access the market that they would not have been able to on their own. So that interconnectedness and understanding how it works and being able sometimes to reconnect things in different ways can give you a very outsized outcome, right? And I know you will get to it, but that's the thing about finding leverage points in a system and the impact that it can have on outcomes.
Thank you so much. Like you basically touched on these different characteristics or components of a system. And one thing that I'm hearing from you, one big thing I'm hearing from you is this different parts, different units, and how they are interconnected, and how you organize and, let me even use the word, curate the interaction among these different parts towards a common purpose. And that is really the beauty of systems thinking. And from our side, we also had a client that was trying to address a very big common purpose or outcome. And they understood that there were diverse components of the system that existed, and they were also trying to interact with, and how they took that system and built a master plan around it. So it's really this ability to identify the different components of an existing system and figure out what's the best way for these components to interact and coordinate in an organized fashion that delivers the kind of outcomes that we are looking for. And to now define and explain further what systems thinking is, and coming back to Francis' question, systems thinking is a holistic approach to understanding complex problems by viewing them as part of interconnected units rather than isolated parts. It emphasizes the relationships and interactions among the components of a system and how these connections influence the overall behavior of the systems itself. And like you said, Sorumfe, it's looking at these parts together versus in isolation. And I want to ask, Adenka, what do you think about this this explanation of systems thinking? What does it mean to you as an innovation leader?
So thank you, Charles. Looking at the definition, there are some words that jump at me. And the first three words that jump at me is number one is the holistic approach, which we will be all looking at as there's a need to look at a problem end to end, look at the ecosystem, everything, both internal and external to that system that is impacted by that system and problem, whether it's people, process. The second thing that jump at me is the interconnected units and the relationships interactions. For me, system thinking power is that its ability to define the interconnected units and the relationship and interaction between them. And I can give you a live scenario. So I used to run Black Friday for a big Nigerian e-commerce company. And I remember my first Black Friday. Logically, an e-commerce company is 5 units. The storefront, which is a website or a mobile app, then you have the warehouse, you have the logistics that do the shipping, you have the payment, and you have the, what's the last one? Sorry, let's start with the 5, I can't remember the top of it. Now, as we start the first time we had a successful Black Friday, our problem was in the storefront. So we went, pull up the storefront. Then we had the second one, and our problem progressed into the warehouse where the others are supposed to be picked. And it was obvious to me that approaching this problem like this will just lead to failure. So we did a deep dive, brought in, looked at that whole problem, and we defined the relationship to the point that a model was built to stimulate the whole system. And based on this model, we're able to simulate the relationship, simulate the interaction, simulate the behaviors, and that allows us to be able to predict how the system will behave. And subsequently, we were able to manage the Black Friday sales going forward. We never had a downtime, we never had a failure because that level of understanding that relationship was key. So we know how much marketing we should do in front to get us the orders we need. We know how the orders will be distributed across each states. We know the merchant we should tell to preload their order because they will get more sales. And as simple as it is, looking at that system holistically gave us a clear understanding of that relationship, the dependency, and how they interact together. And that is very critical because that system is a big orchestra. Take it from me. If one point drops, everything kind of just slows down. So we have to internalize the level of complexity, bring it together, and make sure everything works together. And it was clear where the points where problems will occur. By the time we simulated that model, we know where the problems will occur. We're able to put in solutions there to make sure the whole system works together.
Interesting. As you described that beautiful piece of work you did for the e-commerce company, I just remembered, someone who is also in the call here, and I was talking to him about this webinar, and he was talking about, one of the challenges we're having right now in our project is how do we unlock the capital to really deliver this project at scale. And thinking about Francis's question about is system different from a value chain? And I said a value chain is a system. I'm thinking about my other friends, need around financing, and I'm also trying to say that even the financing itself and the way it's done is a system. And from what you've said, Adeyinka, by understanding the interconnected units, the relationships and interactions of the people in that financial, in quotes, ecosystem, you are really able to then navigate your way towards a particular outcome, which is fundraising. So many, if not everything around us, are systems. And the more we can position our mindset from a systems thinking point of view, the more empowered and enabled we become. And like this, client I was talking about earlier with the master plan, their problem was, look, how do we drive economic development in the northeastern part of Nigeria? And like, as we all know, that part of the region has different, types of problems, which are in itself systemic, whether it's insurgency, whether it's insecurity, all these different elements. These are complex problems but they are systems in themselves. And I want to ask, Sorumfe, from your experience, Sorumfe, when with your teams or with your colleagues, um, applying systems thinking to problems, to complex problems, what is the impact of applying systems thinking? And I'd love you to just shed some light around the benefits of systems thinking from your own position and experience.
Thank you, Charles. There are many benefits to systems thinking, but I'll point out two very simply. The first one is that it saves time. It really, really does save time. It forces you to accept the reality of the challenge that you are trying to solve, right? One of the challenges that people have in general, and this is just a human challenge, is that we tend to I think the human mind or brain would always naturally seek to simplify complex problems, right? So in the example that Adeyinka gave, right, what would typically happen is somebody just comes in and says, no, 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 just buy more bikes, right? Or oh, no, 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 just it's because of these are Nigerian vendors. Let's go and let's get it from China. Some people just tend to spit out a solution, and depending on how senior the person is that speaks, and depending on the culture of the organization, they go off and do that. And if you get into conversations with people, even in the largest organizations, particularly in the part of the world where we're from, what you find out is that sometimes people go through 4, 5, 6, 7 cycles of that, right? The same problem, and somebody just says, oh, let's go do that. And maybe the person says it very articulately or seems to put some objective reasoning around their subjective opinion. And they go off, and then the cycle repeats itself. What systems thinking does for you is that right at the beginning, it forces everybody to take into consideration all of those interconnected parts, so that when you come up with a solution, it is very clear as to how and why that solution would work. You may need to tweak it, you may need to monitor, you may need to change certain things, but except you've made a mistake in your analysis of the system, you should begin to see the direct influence of the input on the output and make considerations around that. So very simply, systems thinking saves time. The second thing is that, again, very close to what I have just shared, is it allows the people who are analyzing that system or trying to solve a challenge or create something, share a singular perspective. It brings everybody to the table and aligns everybody around an objective, right? So, and I'll use, again, I love Adeyinka's example, so I'll borrow my apologies, right? The gentleman in the logistics that leads logistics, as far as he's concerned, he gets an order, he ships it out. He's not bothered about whether the people dealing with vendors have a great relationship with them, whether the vendors have enough inventory in their own stores to deliver to the warehouse. That's not his business. For him, it's like, just give me an order, I put it on a bus or on a bike or whatever it is, and I send it out. That's how he's thinking. That's how he's optimizing his team, right? You speak to somebody else in another part of the business, everybody is optimizing. So the person that is building the storefront can be optimizing to take in 1 million orders. He's not bothered about whether the logistics chain can handle 1 million orders, right? And he has no consideration around that. So sometimes when you're looking at that system, you find out that the person who built the storefront did proper analysis and figured out that they would get 1 million orders in one day, but never communicated it to the person in the logistics or warehouse department. He just optimized the website for 1 million orders, made sure that he can scale on whatever cloud platform he's using, and that the site will not go down. He gave a high five to the members of his team, and they were like, "We're ready to go," right? But it's when you go through this process of systems thinking, suddenly he surfaces that, we've analyzed 5 or 6 or 7 other websites around the same incident. This is the scale that we're expecting, and we have built the website to be able to manage that. We're going to hand over those orders to the logistics team. Are you guys capable of managing this? And the logistics is like, we can only do 200,000. We can't do 1 million. And then you take a decision as a company whether, do you want to reduce the number of orders that come in from the website by limiting inventory just because you can't scale. So it allows you to take the whole problem into perspective and align everybody around the common goal, which ideally would be profitability for the company and increase in revenue without destroying your reputation.
I really, really like the way you landed this conversation. And when you said save time, I just remembered what one of my bosses used to say. He says, we go slow to go fast. That initial systems design might look like, oh, we're going really slow. But in other words, to your point, it's bringing everybody together to be on the same page. It's enabling us to all collaborate towards a common shared purpose. It's taking out the confusion and providing layers of clarity around the pathway to getting to the results that we want to unlock. And all the activities now begin to integrate and become cohesive, become organized, and we move from a place of siloed dependency to a place of empowerment, both for the individual parts and for the collective as a whole, looking at this example of logistics. And if we want to deliver results faster, then we must embrace systems thinking. And I think we've talked a lot about the why, the what, and the benefits of it. How do we actually implement systems thinking in our projects, in our businesses, in our products, in the problems that we are trying to absorb? And that's really the ending part of this presentation. And we're going to go through 7 steps and very quickly touch each of them one by one. And the first one here is to, like Adeyinka said, we need to clarify the problem. We're very quick to know what the solution is, but we need to clearly articulate the issue we want to address. We need to know them to the granular level of how they really are in reality. And we must involve the stakeholders that are in one way, whether directly or indirectly connected to that problem, so we can get different perspectives about the problem, because the way we see a problem might not be the way the entire world is seeing that problem. So really that is that's the first part. And I want to come back because I know Adeyinka mentioned it at the beginning of the webinar. I want to ask Adeyinka again in terms of problem clarification. Seems to be the foundation. Adeyinka, can you talk some more about the importance of problem clarification at the starting journey of systems thinking?
Thank you, Charles. 80% of time, people think they know the problem they want to solve and the solution. The problem is not the outcome. What's blocking your outcome is a problem. So you can go to a session and say, we want to increase profit by 50%. Yeah, but that's not really the problem. The real problem you want to solve is why are we not able to do it? So when problems are not really defined, people solve what is in their head. And solving wrong problem is common every day. If you look at that logistics example that I gave, I was actually smiling, looking at some first feedback, because what he said was what happened in the first court. Everybody was just paying money at problem. Everybody was running around this. Until we last asked ourselves, what do you want to do? Have a successful Black Friday, and we don't want to go down. We don't want to lose money. There's also some financial consideration because historically people lose money on Black Friday. And we said we are not going to lose money, and because we said that, a lot of things changed. So you could be solving the wrong problem, and you will use a lot of time and energy on it. And occasionally, you're even solving a problem that doesn't exist. As a solutions guy, having to lead a lot of development, at times people bring to me problems that I said, but this is a culture change. Why are you trying to use an application to solve a behavioral change? This is a training, and let's go to HR. And a lot of people don't like that, but problems don't just exist. Some problems people try to solve are not real problems. They are just misalignment in the system that can be solved easily. Also, if you don't define your problem carefully and clearly, you will assume a lot of facts. Like he said, the first assumption was, oh, let's just dump in more servers. And we did that, by the way. We got servers, we moved to auto scaling, like we go to 10 servers at once. But that wasn't our real problem. When we actually got successful, we only used 4 servers. So there's a lot of assumption people make on what the problem is, how the problem should be solved. And we can start acting on this assumption. We waste money, we waste time. We have not framed the problem very well. And if that is not done, the cost of the business is also huge. Lastly, because of time, when you don't look at your problem holistically, you are likely to overlook the interdependency within that system. Because a good problem definition should take into cognizance the interdependencies of the units, so that you are not creating a problem. Like the way that problem was dimensioned was made to look like a storefront problem originally, whereas the whole ecosystem was not designed for volume. It was a scaling problem. But initially, it was dimensioned as a storefront problem. So was so correct. And that's because when we are looking at the problem, we did not look at its interdependencies. We did not align all the stakeholders. So that problem definition must be holistic. Once it's not holistic, people just run.
I really love your last point, and the key word there is holistic, and it takes me into a case study that we did a couple of years ago, and I don't know why logistics keep coming up. It seems that's like the primary school for systems thinking. So we were looking at a problem in retail, and the problem was that we're not penetrating rural markets. We don't have any penetration there. Once you start driving out of a city, as you start driving, the farther and farther out of the city you go into a rural place, the more the reduction of your distribution, the increase of your prices. So penetration was really low. So we took our time. We spent 3 months just trying to understand the problem. We were visiting the villages. We were looking at all the different parts of that value chain, of that supply chain, understanding each part, and then figuring out what the interconnectedness really looked like. So deepening clarifying the problem is very, very important. And coming back to your last point of it being holistic, step 2 enables that. You need to map the system. We need to visualize the problem by mapping the existing system, not in the way we want it to be, but the way it actually is. We need to identify the key components. We need to visualize the interconnections, and we need to consider the factors like resources and different type of things that influence, the system. And on the right-hand side of this slide is a systems map of an undergraduate university, looking at the different stakeholders and components and how they interact. So mapping the system is very very important. And then after you map the system, the third thing to do is you analyze the behaviors. And understanding system behavior is really, really important. And I want to come back to Sorunfe now. Understanding system behaviors is another level of problem clarification. I want to ask Sorunfe, how do you approach this from your experience? How do you analyze system behaviors?
So I'm going to take the first point on your slide, which says examine patterns and trends. And then I'll do a slight segue. It still speaks to systems thinking, but it's fundamental to how I personally approach systems and systems thinking. And it's the concept of waves, right? And these are like large scale events that potentially you don't predict yourself, you don't create yourself, but that have an outsized effect on whatever it is that you're trying to do or what you're trying to achieve, and can either be harnessed to improve your outcomes, excuse me, or could, bury you or destroy you, right? So that first point there that says examine patterns and trends, there are also patterns and trends that do not lend themselves to predictability, in the sense that you don't say that something is happening. A very practical example of this would be the current tariff war, right?
Mm-hmm.
By this time last year, nobody sat down and said this is where we would be right now. So that's a perfect example of a wave, right? Now, in analyzing your system, one of the things that I try to do, or that I look to make sure that I do, is to understand that system's ability to deal with these waves, these large scale, large sized events that wash over it. Because one of the challenges with systems thinking is that when you do your analysis of the system and you lay it out, there sometimes can be a false sense of confidence, given that the system would work 99% of the time. So you've done the work. So you're not at the level that we started with, where you're all working in silos. You've done the work, you've laid out the system, you've analyzed it for the right outcome. But there's something in it's chemistry, right? In science, where they say STP, at standard temperature and pressure. So that analysis is at STP, right? You're saying, given, so it's a fantastic example, so I'll use it. So given that Black Friday is coming up, we expect a spike. We've laid out the entire system. Our value chain is set up. All of that is working well. However, you have not considered a 200% devaluation of the naira, right? You have not also considered an increase in tariffs. Let me even use that as an example, at the ports, limiting your vendors' ability to bring in their. So for me, in analyzing systems, there are two sides to it. There is the ability to lay it out as it should be, a holistic perspective, but there is also a consideration for that long-tailed black swan, unlikely scenario that can totally damage that system if it is not taken into consideration, and making sure that, along with the standard analysis that you do to have this whole this wide scale systems thinking perspective, you also have an underlying layer that, at the very least, allows the system to be robust. In other words, it can deal with shocks, and at the very best allows it to be anti-fragile, where potentially, even when those waves come, the system is able to capture those waves and draw energy from them, and even drive a better outcome for you as an individual or an organization. So for me, that's really how I tend to think about these things.
Thank you so much, Sorunfe. You have touched a very important element that many of us as leaders or as innovators overlook, because as we understand the problem, we feel we know everything that is required to know. And thinking about external factors that may be outside our system, but can have a direct impact on the system itself, or even change the dynamics of the existing system as they are. And using examples like what is happening with tariffs, and identifying potential or possible external risks, whether from the political side or whether from the economic side, really enables it actually takes the analysis to a level that makes it more resilient. And one example here around that we did for systems behavior is we looked at with a client is we looked at agriculture, and we looked at the farm to market system, and we realized that look, it's broken. And it's broken for a couple of reasons. And as you start asking the why question, you are actually conducting some level of system behavior analysis. So for example, someone in a small town somewhere wants produce consistently and at a good price. But the problem is when you start from the farmer, you realize that a majority of what they produce they can't store, so they lose it. So if the guy is producing 100 tomatoes, he's probably only able to take 30 or 40 of them to the market, and he still wants to earn a decent buck from his entire planting season. So that impacts the price. Taking the tomatoes to an open market where different customers like the retailer comes to buy, the logistics to do that is also expensive. That impacts the price as well. The open market has its own inefficiencies. The retailer in the town, in the small town, needs to bring a vehicle to the open market, buy, load. That in itself is expensive. So looking at the system and trying to ask that question of why actually helps. And you mentioned this, Sorumfe, identifying leverage points. And this, as you analyze the system and you analyze the system behavior, you then begin to look for, okay, what are the leverage points? Which point of the system, if I can make a small change, can lead to a big impact? What is, you say, where is the power in the system? Where is the power? Where is that place that really addresses the root causes of what you're trying to do? And back to your point again around things that you're not probably seeing, I think in this point of trying to identify leverage points, you want to start looking at some external factors that are probably outside of your control that if they emerge could actually change the dynamics of things. I mean, I think there's something in business school they call scenario planning, where you are looking at different scenarios if this should happen, and now basically to ask yourself, okay, how do you change these leverage points so that your system can respond to these external factors? And once you're able to identify those points, you then start saying, can I develop interventions? All right, can I develop interventions around these specific focal points? So if we were to come back to that example I just mentioned, where we said, oh, the logistics is expensive, and it affects the pricing, you then begin to say, and also affects the availability. You then begin to say, okay, do you look at logistics and say, oh, how do we enable it? How do we build an intervention around it? Do we start looking at agents, or do we start looking at solutions? Or from a post-harvest loss standpoint, which is also another critical factor, how do we have local warehousing that can increase the shelf life of these items? Can this warehousing be at the open market, which is the point of interaction between the final customer, who is the retailer, and the supplier, who is the farmer? So identifying these leverage points and building interventions around them is really critical. And I want to ask Adeyinka another question in terms of this. As we prioritize where to focus on and carry stakeholders along. We believe this is really, really very, very critical. All right, even as we go into the implementation and monitoring phase. From your experience, Adenka, can you share some tips on how to really carry along stakeholders as we implement and as we build the system?
All right, thank you, Charles. So from my experience, the best time to carry your stakeholders along is at the problem framing stage. Make them be part of that problem and solution, and let them be part of the analysis. Let them be part of the decision around the connectivity. Let them be part of the conversation around discovering the leverage point and how they impact. And let them be part of the proposed solutions and ideas to make the system work better. That way, when we get to implementation, when we get to monitoring, they don't feel estranged. If you come to them at the last stage, you've lost them, especially in very advanced systems. Systems that have, how will I say, they are Hydra-headed. There's one VP here, there's one director there, there's one chief there, and everybody have their own strategic agendas. And because of that, if you start that late, you're not going to get much. In simpler systems, you may get it that if you bring them at the solution stage. But in my experience, bringing these people in early to be part of the system thinking would be the best solution, because it's about systems. And like we said, systems include people and processes, solutions, unit, and their relationships. If you don't leverage the people side of that relationship, by the time you get here, I think you can't do too much.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think people are at the core of systems design and implementation. And like you said, it's important to start with them at the beginning and move with them along the process, and then implement with them as well. And doing these first 6 things, then takes us to the last step, which is how do we sustain change. And being this is the 7th step, and as we wrap up, I want to just get some final thoughts from Sorumfe and Adeyinka, from their experience. After all is said and done, we are implementing and we are monitoring the systems that we design. How do we sustain change? Let's start with Sorumfe.
In one sentence, I would say every decision should come from a very deep holistic perspective, right? The security man at the gate in a bank should understand how he contributes to the bank's top line and bottom line. And the reason that I say that is once everybody understands that holistic perspective, then it's much easier to sustain change, because the decisions they make will eventually tie in directly at the individual level, right? In the absence of that, what tends to happen is that in the initial phases of implementing systems thinking, you get good results. But as people start to, because people don't understand the why, they then eventually go back into the normal human tendency of creating tribes and clusters and silos. And so you find yourself coming back in 3 years' time to come and do another systems thinking training and layout and all of that, just because. And then you also have to be careful about turnover, right? So as people leave the organization and more people are coming in, you have to make sure that that information is passed on. Everybody understands why the warehouse has to talk to storefronts, right? And things like that.
Wonderful. Adeyinka?
All right, thank you, Josh. Thanks, Sorofet. So there is a process called institutionalization. Pardon my pronunciation, which means for every change you want to last in an organization, you have to institutionalize it. And it's different, and I think you put it in your slide, and it's different for each organization. That comes from impact on policies, like you said, impact on organizational structure, impact on training, impact of goals, impact of emissions. You need to define what are these impacts across the whole system and start embedding it in. If you don't embed it to the day-to-day behavior of that system, that change will not be sustainable. And as simple as that word is, or as long as it is, that process is a marathon. It's the hardest part of change management. And if you don't, and from my experience, change things, when you're making change in an enterprise, take two, depending on the age and the culture of the organization, it's between 9 months to 5 years. So you need to know your change cycle and start this institutionalization to coincide with overlapping change cycle so that this change is spotted across and is there. Also, like Shrum first said, you need to make the people aware why we are doing these changes. People don't do well with changes, they don't understand why. And that's why we try to bring them in from the beginning. But along with that, we have to make sure we institutionalize it so that it becomes part of the organization, not just a project that has a start date and end date. If we do it like that, that's not systematic, that's just a project. But if you want it to, the value of it to be sustained, you have to make sure you institutionalize every part of the feedback from that solution and create it into the whole system, embed into the whole system.
Interesting. We have a question from someone in the audience, and she's asking, so would having standard operating procedures help a company with systems thinking? In other words, is SOPs, is it part of the institutionalization, or does it stand on its own as an expression of systems thinking? Adinka, do you want to take this question?
So SOPs are actually part of institutionalization. They do not tell you how we got to those SOPs, so they are not part of system thinking. But when you're trying to institutionalize, you may have to change some SOPs. So for example, now, I was working in an organization similar to these telecoms, and we did a promo that we crashed the whole system. We gave people so much credit. We never talked to the guys in core network, and we crashed the whole telecoms organization. It's long ago. I think Francis will remember those days, and we grounded the whole organization to a halt. And after that, we changed the SOP to say you cannot do a promo without engaging the core network guys to give you a clear permission that the promo can go ahead. And until you have their permission, there's no promo you're going to do. And they would dimension it into which area and they know the impact. As simple as that is, that was a change in the SOP. So as you are looking at the problem you are trying to solve, definitely you will change a couple of SOPs, but that is the end result and it's part of its institutionalization. It doesn't necessarily impact the thinking, because at times the SOP can also be a reinforcement against changes, against improving the organization. So one of the things people use when they don't want to change, if they tell you that we have an SOP that says we should not change. So it can be used for or against, but it's a tool for institutionalization.
Very, very interesting. Thank you so much, Adeyinka. Thank you so much, Sorumfe. We've come to the end of the session and we're wrapping up now. And I think, the big takeaway is, these are the 7 steps. We'll be sharing the recording to all the participants today and also those that are on our mailing list. But here are some of the key takeaways. You are a systems thinker by nature. Systems thinking can be applied to solve very complex issues. And we can see systems all around us. Cross-team collaboration is critical. Carrying your stakeholders from beginning, even at the time of problem discovery and definition, is critical. Carrying them all through the 7 steps and towards the end is also very, very important. I really like what Adeyinka said about institutionalization, because that will sustain change. Lastly, leverage the 7-step framework to apply systems thinking to any of your projects or problems that you are trying to solve. And if you need help in building systemic solutions, we at Hyber, you can reach out to us. You can go to our website and drop and fill a form, or you can just send us an email or get in touch directly with any of my colleagues or even myself. We're here to solve big problems, and the world needs innovation leaders like you. You need problem solvers like us, and together we know that we can solve and we can build systemic solutions by applying systems thinking. I want to thank my two wonderful guests today, Mr. Sorumfe from Microsoft. Thank you so much for joining us, and also Mr. Adeyinka from Rex Insurance. Thank you so much for joining us. We deeply appreciate your insights today, and we want to call it a wrap. Thanks everyone for joining the call today, and we hope you have gotten some very good insights about the systems mindset. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Adeyinka. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us. Cheers.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me, Charles. Thanks, Sorumfe.
You're welcome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.